Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay, but as you can see by the number of open seats here at the table that we have not achieved a quorum. What I will do is I will take roll, and when we don't achieve a quorum, we will table the approval of the minutes from the last meeting until we do have the next meeting. And then we will proceed with the agenda because it's mostly, it's all informational from that point forward. So with that, I will call the roll. Chief Scott Howland, absent. Brenda Bruner. Here. Leanne Magoski. Hanan Harb. Or Hannah, is it? Hanan Harb, sorry about that. Sheriff Ingrid Braun. Sheriff Corey Honia. Chief Michael Miller. Here. Chief Chris Herron.
Here.
Chief John
I'll
Peters.
take the chief. Yeah.
You're not chief?
Sometimes.
I'm sorry.
Depends, just at home.
Chief John Peters is absent and Chief Craig Carter is absent. So with that, we'll move on to, we will table item number 2 until next meeting. Item number 3 is an update from our chief of our Legislative and External Affairs Office, Mr. Reggie Salvador. Reggie, the floor is yours.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the new members of the board, and greetings, our current members of the board. In terms of the current legislative update, the big actual the biggest deal right now is our trailer bill language for the 911 sustainment. Initially, in January, during the governor's proposed budget, trailer bill language was introduced to restructure the Setna fund to go from a percentage rate to a flat fee rate. In our ongoing negotiations with telcos as well as Assembly and Senate leadership, we've come to agreement with language that also come May revise a proposal to upgrade the state's microwave network, or CAPSnet, was also introduced. That is also contingent upon the passage of this trailer bill to reset or to restructure the fee. So both houses, both the Senate and the Assembly, had agreed to the language, and it passed out of both houses and is now not included in the current conference budget negotiations, which means that all houses, as well as both parties, the Assembly and on the Assembly and the Senate side, both Democrats and Republicans have supported it. So, as it requires a 2/3 vote, that is a really huge deal. So that is past that. And on the federal side, just wanting to connect on HR 4672, which was introduced last year. At the end of this month, Ann Escher, who co-chairs the Next Gen 911 caucus, congressional caucus, will be hosting a luncheon for the California Congressional Democrats, where OES will provide a briefing on the status of Next Gen 911 projects here in California. That will be done at the end of June, that Budge Courier will participate in. And so we will be getting an update on that also come the next meeting. That is also tied into a new caucus that was developed as a result of the fires of 2017. Congressman Mike Thompson had developed and created, with the approval of Congress, a natural disaster caucus. So those two caucuses will be doing some work fairly closely within the next couple of months. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Reggie. And I do apologize. because we did not have the quorum, I got thrown off of my agenda. I would also like to welcome we actually have 4 new board members, 3 of whom are here, plus 2 reappointments. Brenda Bruner was appointed on May the 30th and comes to us from the Alameda County Sheriff's Department as a representative of the National Emergency Number Association. So welcome, Brenda. Sheriff Ingrid Braun, who is...
Sorry, she had a correction.
Oh, this says NENA. Okay. I'm sorry. APCO. Okay, Sheriff Ingrid Braun, who's unfortunately is not here, is a representative of the California State Sheriff's Association. She's the sheriff of Mono County. She was appointed on May 22nd. Hanan Harb was appointed on May the 20th. Now, are you from NENA? Are you from? Yeah, you're from Cal NENA. Okay, I apologize. Leanne Magoski was also appointed on May 22nd. She serves as the Communications Dispatch Manager for Marin County, and she's also a representative for the National Emergency Number Association. Chief Scott Howland from CHP was reappointed on May 22nd, as was Sheriff Cunilla from Butte County. He was also reappointed on June 4th. So welcome to them, and our thanks to outgoing board members Charles Cullen, Charles Burdan, Jim Melee, and Paul Troxel. For those of you who don't know, Paul joined the dark side. He came over to Cal OES. Is actually working for us now. So again, I apologize for taking things out of order. Next item up is FirstNet update. So as most of you know, back in December, the governor made a decision to opt into the FirstNet program. Opting in gave AT&T the ability to build out Band 14 throughout California. With their agreement with FirstNet, AT&T received a commitment of $6.5 billion in federal funding to assist in that deployment. They are in the process of doing the design and working with the Cal OES team to identify coverage gaps in California to try to address those. And I think it's important to point out that while California has opted into FirstNet, there is no requirement that an agency subscribe to the FirstNet AT&T solution. That's an individual choice based on the coverage and the needs of those individual agencies. The benefits of priority and the broadband services, the benefits of the public safety broadband services are priority and preemption and some other features, specifically applications that are being developed for the first responder community. AT&T, has promised that they will provide updates to us on an ongoing basis, and we have a meeting with them, and that they will be providing a series of data-rich applications which they're vetting through FirstNet. Cal OES has clearly defined the needs and priorities that we must see in California. Gaps that do remain, and Cal OES is working with AT&T and FirstNet continually to improve the plan. We continue to emphasize what services are needed from AT&T and FirstNet. We're questioning and we're waiting for information on the specific cost. What is the LTE coverage that AT&T, the 4G LTE coverage that AT&T will provide, and how will AT&T and FirstNet address the gaps? We've been working with the California Department of Technology to develop a contract. Our goal is to have that contract in place by the end of August, knock on wood. And once that contract in place, all agencies can use the contract if they so desire, or they can use whatever contracting mechanism they have on their own. That our state contract will define a cost, services, and some important details of the AT&T offering. Negotiations with AT&T are continuing with the goal, as I said, of having it all wrapped up by the end of August. We do have the California board is still meeting, and our next meeting is next week on June the 13th at 1 p.m. At our Sequoia Pacific campus in Sacramento. Are there any questions regarding FirstNet report? Okay, agenda item number 5 is Budge Courier regarding the 911 Emergency Communications Branch update.
So I'll stand here so I'm not behind any of you, and maybe you could turn down the mic a little bit. So I'm going to give you an overview of where we're at the branch, and you've got slides to follow along. And because there's quite a bit of detail, if you have questions, just stop me midstream, and I'll be happy to answer those so you don't have to think back a ways. So these are the things we're going to be covering. I'll give you some call statistics. We'll give you an update on our wireless routing. I'll talk about the fiscal and operational review. That was an ask at the last board, and we have some data on that. And I'm going to talk about where we're at with our customer premise equipment, a summary of contracts, and also where we are with NextGen. These stats have not changed. We like to keep these statistics up for each of for each board, just to highlight the total number of calls, 28.1 million. And the breakdown, about 80% of those are wireless, 15% wireline, and then voice over IP and telematics. The text number last year was about a little over 18,000 total statewide, and as more and more PSAPs deploy text to 911, next year we anticipate that number going up as well. The wireless technical routing analysis project legislation was passed that required the 911 branch to take a look at the routing for wireless routing specifically. And so what we do each year is we look at every cell sector in the state and take a look at those that have a transfer rate greater than 20%. And then we take a look to make sure that cell sector is routing to the right PSAP. We looked at 330,582 cell sectors last year. 35,000 of those were submitted for reroute. And you see the breakdown of whether they were rerouted from a PSAP to CHP, or from one PSAP to another PSAP, or from CHP to a PSAP, or from one CHP dispatch center to another. And that's the breakdown categories that we have there. So what we've been working on, the goal is once we identify the reroute, we submit those reroutes to the carriers. And then we want that reroute to be in place for 12 months so we can track the next set of call statistics to see if we routed it correctly. Because it takes time to make the reroute and then gather the data so you have something statistically valid in order to verify what your rerouted was done correctly. So we've been working very closely with the providers, the wireless providers. The next slide that you see are the number of cell sectors that were submitted by carrier for reroute and their percentage completion for last year. So you see that AT&T, Verizon, and US Cellular have all completed their cell sector reroutes, and we're still working with T-Mobile and Sprint in order to get theirs done. The problem is it's difficult to go do the next set of analysis until the reroutes are completed. Otherwise, you don't have valid data, and you couldn't end up looking at a sector you've already analyzed for reroute. So we need to get these completion levels up in order to start this, to continue this process over this current year. So are there any questions with that? All right, so moving on. Fiscal and operational review. So those of you who manage dispatch centers, which I think is almost everyone here with maybe one exception, we visit, our goal is to visit each PSAP at a minimum every 3 years, but certainly once during each equipment replacement cycle, which happens every 5 years. So we have a schedule, and you can see how many we're completing each quarter. In 2017, we did 83. So far in 2018, we've already done 43, which means we're going to beat that 83 number by a significant margin this year. We had a number of new staff. It took us a while to get them trained up. They're now trained up. So we have 4 PSAP advisors who have a fairly aggressive fiscal and operational review schedule. And what we're saying to PSAPs is if you have not been contacted by us and you want us to come sooner than when we've regularly scheduled you, let us know and we'll come sooner. But we're on a reoccurring schedule for these. And each quarter our goal is to do at least 30. And you could see we're on pace certainly to do that this year as well. In the last advisory board, we were asked to take a look at CPE installations and how many installations we've done each year. That ties directly into that fiscal and operational review that we do. So in 2017, there were 54 that we signed system acceptance with. The reason why that number was a little low is because in 2017, we went about 5 months without having a contract in place in order to order those services. That obviously affected the system acceptance. This year so far, we've done 9. We have some very large centers that are in the queue this year. CHP centers, LAPD, and other very large ones that will be going this year. So you can see the numbers year by year. 2016 was a big year, and we anticipate 2018 is going to be fairly large as well. We have quite a few that are in the process right now. There was a little bit of backlog that was created in that contract gap, and we're making that up. So any questions on that? All right. Our contract status, the foreign language contract essentially has not changed since the last advisory board. We reported out there was a new contractor, Voyance, and we've transitioned 100% of the PSAPs from the old contract to the new contract, those that wanted to. We put out a memo that said if you don't want to transition, you could still use the other contractor. You just had to go through CMAS to do that. A majority went with the new vendor, and all of those transitions have occurred. So that's in place. The next gen contracts, we have 2 working contracts. Each of those are in a different status. In the Northeast, the CPUC came out with a ruling after we released the contract that said that you had to have a certificate of public conveyance and necessity, or a CPCN. And without that, you also had to have a tariff in place for 911 services. So the vendor that was selected in the Northeast, ROI is the name of that company, they did not have that. And so they had to go and establish that. There's a process. They're still in the process of completing that. We just heard that the administrative law judge reviewed it and put the public-facing comments of where they're at are available. And so once that's completed, we can move that project forward. Pasadena Ring, the challenge there is we're in this new regulatory space where selective routers and all of the existing network are defined in tariff. Very clear rules and tariff guidance on what you can do. In this new world, there's a contract that defines next gen that wasn't linked to the tariff. And so the contract said there's certain requirements, and the tariff had other details in it. So now we've got to try and merge those 2 things together without having the language in place to support all the details. So that contract we're working on, and it comes down to the boundaries of the originating service providers and the local exchange carriers that are aggregating traffic. And how do you get that traffic from the selective router, where they're aggregated today, into the ESI net? And we've got to work through those details. We're pretty close to solving that, but we're also very aware that, as are all the vendor community, that it sets precedent, and we want to make sure that that precedent aligns with regulation. And so that's really where that project's at. Any questions on that? Text to 911, the contract's been extended. We have, the county coordinator task force will provide an update of the text status when they brief out. The next gen 911 transition, as Reggie discussed, one of the pieces, and I'm going to go over that in just a minute, is to make sure that we have the funding and the authorization to build out next gen. And then we have to link together this tariff world and this contract world. And we're in the process of doing that right now. And I've got a couple of slides that will show you where we are on this process, right? So next gen, this graphic, we've been using this to describe the 4 pieces of the puzzle. You can see that funding is almost but not quite plugged in. We're very close to snapping it all the way together, and we should know by July 1st that that's happened with the governor's budget. Procurement is the piece that we're working on now. So once we have the funding and the authority to build out next gen, then we'll work on the procurement piece, and I'll talk a little bit about that. This is a graphic I've been using. I've briefed this out to the board already on connecting the various technologies. I'm going to probably keep this in there just so that there's always a quick reference point. Next Gen's focused on bringing the data from those that need help into the PSAP. Your land mobile radio system is that mission critical push to talk that's going to be here. Continue to support it, do your life cycle planning, make sure that that's accounted for. Pat provided an update of FirstNet and broadband services, which are really focused on getting the data from the PSAP out to the emergency responder, along with some other capabilities. And then the last piece of the puzzle is alert and warnings, which does not go backwards through the 911 system. It's a different path, although it potentially could arrive at the same device that you would use to call 911. It's just a different path to get there. So these pieces we've been using to help those not familiar with the technologies understand how they fit together and work together in order to provide emergency response. This graphic has not changed other than we rounded off the call numbers to make them a little bit easier to read, but this shows the breakdown of the regions throughout the state. There will be a regional NG Core service in 4 regions, and then we're going to lay over top of that a prime core service provider, so that in the event that any single region, I guess I don't have a pointer today, any single region goes down, the prime would be able to route those calls. We have tariff guidance out now that's posted on our website that defines how all this works together so that the next-gen core service providers have a framework that to understand the vision moving forward and how this will be deployed. We've broken down each of the regions by call volume in order to size these networks and capability. And you can see that the prime is large enough to be able to handle the call volume of the entire state. So in the event that more than one region went down, the prime is able to pick up the load. And then we've calculated things like monthly volume, single busiest month, and those calculations were done by taking all the PSAPs in that region and picking their worst day, and then making that all happen on the same day. So we could truly get kind of a worst case scenario. And that's how these numbers were arrived at. We also included the average call duration, which statewide is about 100 seconds. So for those of you who run PSAPs, it's pretty important. If you don't get call location data until 90 seconds into the call, you can see that it's not doing you much good, and that's another conversation we've been having. This is to show the general call flow and how we've organized the network. So the originating service providers will be aggregated, and this could be wireline, wireless, voice over IP, CLEX, I mean, whoever is delivering that 911 call. They'll come into an aggregation, and the assumption is that they're aggregated regionally for that region. So the call flow will go into the region, and the region will deliver the call to the PSAP. If it arrives in the core service and it's not for that region, the prime can then route because the prime is connected to every PSAP. If it arrives at aggregation and the regional core is not available, then the prime can route that to the correct PSAP. If it arrives all the way down to the PSAP and it's not for them and it's for a neighboring region, it can send the call back into the core, which routes it to the prime. And the main purpose of the prime obviously is for redundancy, but it also gives us a number of advantages. We now have a secure IP connection into every single PSAP. So we can do that to facilitate things like text to 911, statewide system monitoring, advanced technology solutions, and providing commonality among interconnection points. So we can define this is what connections at aggregation looks like, this is what connections at PSAP looks like, and this is what connections between regions look like, so that we can have, even with multiple vendors, a standards-based approach that works for all vendors. So that's the vision of this architecture. With this, there will be, and that's a very good question. That's a very good question. With this implementation, there will be a secure connection into every PSAP. The last piece of the puzzle, which Reggie mentioned, CapsNet, what we've learned in recent disasters and with a backhoe driver, you can take out the fiber into a PSAP and take the PSAP down. So CapsNet will be an MPLS or an IP-based microwave network owned by the state, connected into every PSAP, so that in the event that the wholesale providers that are providing those IP paths into the PSAP, something happens there, there's another path in. So that build-out plan is on down the road, and there's a lot of details to work out, but that's the intent of it. Another layer of redundancy to provide a survivable network in the event of a disaster. We've made a lot of headway with the regional task force. I know the LRPC is going to provide an update on that. We've provided a draft charter, and we've provided a list of names. We at the state level are not trying to, dictate how this goes, but we've solicited input from PSAPs in each of the regions, the 4 regions, and the goal is to have 8 to 10 representatives across disciplines, across PSAP sizes, that have the time and the energy to invest in this type of work, so that we can make sure as we roll this out, the operational needs of the PSAP are considered as we roll out Next Gen 911. We expect to, the LRPC will brief out what we discussed at yesterday's LRPC, and we're asking PSAPs out there, if you're interested, to please let us know, because we're still accepting members for most of the regions. I think in the north we have a pretty good representation, but in the central, in LA, and in the southern portion of the state, we certainly could use additional names in those areas. This slide has not changed.
How do those names get submitted?
Just send an email to either me or Andrew Matson in my office, and we'll get them in on the list. This slide hasn't changed, and really in the upper left is roughly the cost today, $104 million. And when we build out Next Gen to its fullest, the bottom right is an estimated estimate of probable cost for Next Gen 911 once we get fully implemented. We'll know more on these numbers when we start to release RFPs and see tariff responses, and these numbers will be further defined. But these are the planning numbers that we have based on nationwide research. Reggie covered most of this, but really the funding plan was 2 steps. There was one portion that gave us the authorized appropriations number from a funding perspective. We can't spend more than what we're appropriated for, regardless of how much we have in the bank. Even if your fund has more than that, you're capped. So we had to adjust that. And then we needed the staffing levels to support the build out. And so that was the first piece of the puzzle. And then, as we've briefed to this board many times, the SETNA fund has been declining for a number of years. And so we had to come up with a sustainable model that would not only be able to sustain existing 911 needs, but would meet the needs of Next Gen into the future. And so that is setting, as part of the governor's budget, awaiting to be voted on by the full House and Senate, full Assembly and Senate. So if it's approved, then we have everything we need. And if you have any questions, the trailer wheel language is available on the Department of Finance website. You can look at it now. It's all public information at this point, and it's part of the governor's budget. So if you have any additional questions, we can certainly answer them now if you have anything specific, because like I said, it's in that public document now. All right. So hearing none, we'll move on. The procurement plan is quite complex, just because of the size and scope. PUC put out guidance that there's got to be a tariff, so we put out this tariff guidance package, which describes the services needed for 911 to work in California. And we've identified 4 major areas of that tariff. We've tried to design this in a way that will last for the next couple of decades because we know that that's the need. And the categories are listed up there. We have a lot of details, and there's the tariff guidance document is about 40 pages long. It's available. We've met numerous times with PSAPs, with industry experts, with vendors, providers, and everyone associated with this space to make sure that what we're doing is supportable, makes sense, and meets the needs of California. And we think we're coming pretty close. So that's where that is. To the vendors that might be listening that are, or those that are in the room, if you don't have a CPCN, you need one. It would be a good time to start. That's quite a process, and that can be done ahead of everything else. Once that CPCN's in place, we would release a RFP soon, probably going to be into July when that happens. And then once the RFP is released, it defines the services. Then more detailed tariffs would be submitted at that point with costing and all that, and then we begin our evaluation and select. And my goal is as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the year, we can have our prime vendor selected and under contract if all these align correctly. Once that prime is done, or prime and regions, we'll just continue to move through the procurement process, because by that point, the tariffs would be in place for the vendors, most likely, that would be responding. The goal is to make sure it's a fair and competitive process to select the best vendor to provide the services needed for each of those areas. This is was my, what some people call a budge timeline, a little bit aggressive perhaps. We wanted to try and release that next-gen RFP in June. That date will probably slip to July, more than likely. And there's a lot of moving pieces here as you try and align the tariff process with the contract process. And there's only so many staff to execute this. And so we have to take all that in consideration. So that date is probably going to slip. The funding approval, we're optimistic that that will happen in July. We're asking anyone who would like to respond to this RFP to have their CPCN in and approved by July. And if the RFP is released in July and you allow, say, 60 days, then toward the end of August, the tariffs would be in place. The tariffs would be required as part of the evaluation, because we can't select somebody under contract who doesn't have a tariff in place. So we have to align that process. There's a little bit of finesse that has to happen there. And then contract award, in a perfect world, it's September. Realistically, it's probably November, December. We'll see. More will follow on the August meeting, and some of these dates will firm up. Once the RFP is released and the key action dates are in there, that's a public document, so I'll be able to share all that with you. I can't publicize key action dates now. These are just planning dates. So any questions on that? Because that's kind of where we are with the procurement. If this is successful, and all these red dates are subject to change, but if they stay somewhat static, this is what we're looking at for a build out for the rest of the network. The goal is to make sure that we're completely off legacy, and all the legacy is turned off by the end of 2022. Everything turned off and transitioned, or sooner. The status of any questions on next gen, because was the last one to let you know where we're at. So the status of setting of this slide has remained unchanged since the last time. These are budget numbers, so they're not actuals, and so they're predictions, and they don't change until really change a fiscal year. So what we've done is included what's in the proposed budget in front of the governor in these numbers. And if these are true, this is what the graph looks like. The green line indicates the steady downward trend that we've had. And with this change, we start to see the upswing so that the lines don't cross and we don't bring in less than what we have in the bank. With that, if there's no other questions, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Any questions for Budge? Okay, on to agenda item number 6, Long Range Planning Committee report, and that will be by the LRPC Chair, Charles Cullen.
Yeah.
Okay, then Mr. Heron, the floor is yours.
Thanks, good afternoon. So the LRPC met twice since our last advisory board meeting, and the primary focus was the regional task forces that Budge mentioned. So just as a matter of what we've done so far, the working with the State 911 branch, the LRPC did finalize the task force charter yesterday. We've also been working with the state on those, the membership, and sorry if I'm not sure if this is repetitive, but the northern region has 10 members identified, and so is, it's looking good and pretty solid. The southern and LA regions each have 6 or 7 members, and so they could take a couple more if there's interest out there. But the central region definitely needs more members. We've only have identified 3 or 4 members in that central region, so we'd definitely like to get a couple more. We did have some discussions yesterday, and I think some LRPC members identified a couple of folks that were possibilities, and we'll submit those names to Andrew. But if anyone else in the audience, either here today or online, is interested, please make sure that you express your interest. As Budge mentioned, those groups are likely to hold their first meetings coming up in July or August of this year. The other primary thing that we've discussed was just our membership. As you see, Charlie had his last LRPC meeting yesterday, and we've also had some other transitions with board member changes. So I know we don't have a quorum today, and we won't be able to take any votes, but I just want to bring it to everyone's attention, and I'll work with Paul Dumais to make sure we get a message out to all of the advisory board members just on this topic. But the LRPC charter indicates that the advisory board may select one representative from each of our 6 organizations. And so as it stands right now, we do have the Fire Chiefs Association, CHP, Police Chiefs, and NENA all represented on the LRPC. APCO, and Brenda, I know you'll work with Chuck just to make sure that we have some continuation of representation from APCO, and then we'll get the message out to the sheriffs that it'd be great if they could either appoint one of them or recommend one of them, or appoint someone else to represent them at the meetings so that we can continue the good work. And so the request then would be to agendize the LRPC membership for the next advisory board meeting so that we can take those nominations from members and vote. And then we'll also need the advisory board to appoint a new chair at our next advisory board meeting. And with that, I think that's it.
Okay, we will place that on the agenda for the next meeting. County Coordinators Task Force, Tracy Kessler.
Good afternoon. First of all, for the County Coordinator Task Force, since the last meeting, there was a forum of the county coordinators, and the primary focus of the forum was for the state OES 911 branch and ECATS to come in, do a presentation on the new routing system for cell phone companies to process wireless routing. They gave the presentation on how it was designed, took suggestions from the county coordinators, went back, finished the product. It's now getting ready for beta testing. That's going to be starting here within the next few weeks. And there's some people selected to help do the beta testing on that. So hopefully by July 1st or so, that'll be started. And we continue to have our conference calls monthly and mentor and help provide support for county coordinators. That's all for the County Coordinator Task Force. Now on to the text to 911 deployment. There are 159 PSAPs deployed, and that is one up from last time. The amount of counties that have selected a TCC are 81, which is up 20, so that's a good number. And the California 911 branch is extending the contract, which Budge talked about, for 2 more years until 2020. And they successfully tested the 911 transfers between ComTech, which is the web-based program, and the integrated solution. No issues between transfers, so that seems to be working. So that means that counties and PSAPs can choose any solution and can now transfer back and forth up to 10 times, I believe, which never happened, but it's provided for. So that's very good news. This says developing chapter 10, but that already has been finished and it's posted for the text to 911 deployment. So I encourage county coordinators and PSAP managers to go in and read that and get familiar with it. PSAPs should still turn in their text to 911 deployment plan if they haven't done so. There are 45 PSAPs that have yet to turn those in. And there have been 6,386 texts since January through April, and it's consistent with 2017 stats. Less than 1% of PSAPs are reporting that they're getting text over voice.
Tracy, not a question, but a comment. During the LRPC meeting yesterday, there was some discussion about text to 911 deployment, and apparently some PSAPs are reporting that the process to deploy seems to have kind of slowed down as they deal with some of the vendors. So I don't know if you guys have discussed that amongst the county coordinators, but we'll just mention it here, and so that if there are others who are experiencing that, make sure that you get that information to the state 911 office.
Okay, we'll make sure. It wasn't mentioned on the call that we had on Tuesday, so.
Okay. We had, there were 2 members of the LRPC who mentioned it specifically, having heard
Okay.
from from PSAPs in their counties, so
All right, well.
just FYI.
Thank you. And also, I forgot to mention, at the last meeting, I think it was Charlie that asked how many were integrated and web-based. So there are, of the 240, 211 have gone with ComTech, which is the web-based, and 29 have gone with the integrated West.
Any questions from the board or anybody in the audience? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, as far as agenda items for future meetings, the first thing is we will be agendizing the long-range planning committee membership. The next scheduled 911 advisory board meeting is scheduled for September 6th. However, we're proposing a change of that to August 30th because the California Chiefs of Police Association meeting is scheduled to be held on the 6th as well. So we will be sending out notices to all the board members and hope that you can accommodate that schedule change. And public comments, are there any comments from any member of the audience? Seeing none, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.